The quiet suburban town of Millbrook seemed like the last place where evil would strike. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, and friendly neighbors created an atmosphere of safety and community trust. Detective Robert Hayes had worked these streets for 15 years without encountering anything more serious than petty theft. On a cold Tuesday morning in November 2019, that illusion of safety would be shattered forever. Margaret Collins, a retired teacher known for her morning walks, discovered something that would haunt the community for years to come. Behind the old oak tree near Riverside Park, she found evidence that would launch one of the most disturbing investigations in local history. The disappearance of 24-year-old Jessica Warren had initially been treated as a missing person case. She was last seen leaving her job at the local library on a Friday evening, telling her colleague Amanda Foster that she planned to meet someone for coffee. Jessica never made it home to her apartment, and her car was found abandoned 3 days later in a shopping center parking lot 20 miles away. Part 2. The investigation begins. The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Park as Detective Robert Hayes arrived at the scene. Margaret Collins stood near the old oak tree, her hands shaking as she pointed toward the disturbing discovery that would change everything. The retired teacher had been taking her usual morning walk when something caught her eye behind the massive tree trunk. Detective Hayes approached the area carefully, his trained eyes scanning every detail. Years of police work had taught him that first impressions at a crime scene could make or break an investigation. What he saw made his stomach turn. Personal belongings were scattered across the ground in a way that told a story of violence and terror. Dr. Patricia Mills arrived within 30 minutes of the call. She was the best forensic specialist in the county, known for her attention to detail and ability to find evidence that others might miss. Her team included photographer Stephen Clark and evidence technician Michael Rodriguez, both experienced professionals who had worked dozens of crime scenes together. The first item they found was a leather handbag, partially hidden under fallen leaves. It belonged to Jessica Warren, the young woman who had been missing for 3 days. The purse was open, its contents spilled across a wide area. Lipstick, keys, and loose change created a trail that suggested Jessica had fought hard against her attacker. Stephen Clark began taking photographs from every possible angle. Each picture would become crucial evidence in court. He captured wide shots showing the entire scene, then moved closer to document individual items. The camera flash lit up the dark areas under the tree where some evidence had been hidden from view. Michael Rodriguez worked methodically, placing small numbered markers next to each piece of evidence before it was collected. He wore latex gloves and used special tools to avoid contaminating anything that might contain DNA or fingerprints. Every item went into a separate evidence bag with detailed labels showing the date, time, and exact location where it was found. The most important discovery was Jessica's cell phone. It lay 15 feet away from her purse, the screen cracked, but still functional. Water damage from 3 nights of rain and morning dew had affected the device, but technology specialist Andrew Turner believed he could recover the data stored inside. Dr. Mills examined the torn pieces of blue fabric caught on nearby branches. The material matched the description of the sweater Jessica had been wearing on the night she disappeared. The way it was torn suggested a violent struggle had taken place in this exact spot. Back at the police station, Detective Hayes began the difficult task of piecing together Jessica's final hours. He started with the phone records that had been obtained through a court order. The last text message Jessica had sent was time-stamped at 7:32 p.m. on Friday evening. It was short and simple, but would prove to be the key to understanding what happened. To her, the message read, "I am here, where are you?" and was sent to a contact saved in her phone as David. 4 minutes later, a response came back with directions to walk deeper into the park area, away from the main paths where other people might see what was happening. Technology expert Rachel Brooks worked in the computer lab to recover more information from Jessica's damaged phone. She used special equipment to bypass the broken screen and access the device's memory. What she found painted a picture of a young woman who had been carefully targeted by someone with evil intentions. The phone contained weeks of text messages between Jessica and someone calling himself David Thompson. The conversations started innocent enough, with discussions about books, movies, and shared interests. But behavioral analyst Dr. Carol Stevens noticed a pattern that made her deeply concerned. David had been using classic manipulation techniques to gain Jessica's trust. He asked personal questions about her daily routine, her work schedule, and her living situation. He seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings, which made Jessica feel special and understood. Jessica's roommate Kelly Martinez was interviewed at the police station. She sat in the small interview room, tears streaming down her face as she tried to help the detectives understand her friend's state of mind during those final weeks. Kelly remembered Jessica talking about David with excitement and hope. Jessica was always careful about meeting strangers, Kelly told Detective Hayes. She had bad experiences with online dating before. But David seemed different. He was patient and never pressured her for anything inappropriate. She really thought he might be the one. Tom Warren, Jessica's older brother, arrived at the station later that afternoon. The construction worker was devastated by the discovery of his sister's belongings and blamed himself for not being more protective. During his interview, he revealed information that made the case even more tragic. 2 weeks before she disappeared, Jessica asked me about meeting people from dating apps, Tom said, his voice breaking. I told her to always meet in public places and let someone know where she was going. She promised she would be careful. I thought she was safe. Detective Sarah Mitchell from the Digital Crimes Unit joined the investigation team. Her expertise in online predators and cybercrime would prove essential in tracking down Jessica's killer. She began analyzing the David Thompson profile that Jessica had been communicating with on the dating app. The profile appeared legitimate at first glance, but closer examination revealed sophisticated deception. The photographs showed an attractive man in his early 30s, but reverse image searches proved they were stolen from a fitness instructor's social media account. The personal information had been carefully crafted to appeal to someone with Jessica's specific interests and values. Phone records showed that David Thompson's number was registered to a prepaid account, purchased with cash at a convenience store 12 miles from Millbrook. Store owner Peter Kim provided security footage from the day the phone was bought, but the person who made the purchase wore a baseball cap and sunglasses that obscured their face. FBI liaison agent Jennifer Parker joined the task force when database searches revealed similar cases in neighboring counties. 3 other young women had disappeared under nearly identical circumstances over the past 18 months. Each had been contacted through dating apps by profiles using different names, but following the exact same communication patterns. The investigation team realized they were not just looking for Jessica's killer, but potentially hunting a serial predator who had been operating across multiple jurisdictions. The stakes had suddenly become much higher, and time was running out to prevent more innocent women from becoming victims. Forensic testing continued on the physical evidence found at the crime scene. DNA traces that did not match Jessica's genetic profile offered hope for identifying her attacker, but the lab work would take several more days to complete. The quiet town of Millbrook was about to learn that their peaceful community had been invaded by pure evil, and the investigation was just beginning to uncover the true scope of the horror that had befallen Jessica Warren. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday morning when cyber investigator James Parker finally cracked the digital mystery behind the David Thompson profile. Working through the night in the police department's computer lab, Parker had traced the fake identity through multiple layers of deception that would have fooled most people. The real person behind the charming online persona was Brian Mitchell, a 38-year-old maintenance worker who had lived quietly in Millbrook for over 5 years. His job gave him access to dozens of buildings throughout the city, including the library where Jessica Warren worked. This detail sent chills down Detective Hayes' spine as he realized the killer had been watching Jessica for much longer than anyone had imagined. Security footage from various locations began to reveal Brian Mitchell's movements on the night Jessica disappeared. The first video came from a gas station 2 blocks from the library. The timestamp showed 6:45 p.m., just 45 minutes after Jessica had left work. Mitchell's distinctive red pickup truck was clearly visible at the gas pumps. Store clerk Maria Gonzalez remembered Mitchell from that evening because his behavior had seemed strange. He had purchased an unusual combination of items including rope, plastic sheeting, and industrial cleaning supplies. Maria told Detective Hayes that Mitchell had been nervous and kept looking over his shoulder as if he expected someone to follow him into the store. He paid with cash and didn't want a receipt, Maria recalled during her police interview. Most people use credit cards for big purchases like that. Something about him made me uncomfortable, but I thought maybe he was just having a bad day. The investigation team obtained a search warrant for Mitchell's house on Elm Street. The small two-bedroom home sat at the end of a dead-end road, surrounded by tall trees that provided complete privacy from neighbors. Detective Hayes felt his heart racing as they approached the front door, knowing they might finally find answers about what happened to Jessica Warren. Evidence technician Paul Anderson led the search team through Mitchell's residence. What they discovered inside painted a horrifying picture of a man who had been planning violent crimes for years. The walls of his basement were covered with photographs of young women who lived and worked in Millbrook, including several pictures of Jessica taken without her knowledge. A detailed map of Riverside Park hung on one wall with specific locations, marked in red ink. The spot where Jessica's belongings had been found was circled multiple times. Handwritten notes described the best times to avoid detection and the quickest routes to move an unconscious victim without being seen. Mitchell's computer contained thousands of files documenting his surveillance activities. Computer technician Ryan Clark worked carefully to preserve the digital evidence while copying everything to secure servers. The files showed that Mitchell had been stalking at least 12 different women over the past 2 years, learning their daily routines and personal habits. The most disturbing discovery was a journal hidden behind a loose floorboard in Mitchell's bedroom. The handwritten pages described violent fantasies in graphic detail and included plans for future attacks. Jessica Warren's name appeared throughout the final entries, along with specific details about her work schedule and living arrangements. Detective Hayes realized they were dealing with a predator who had been escalating his criminal behavior over time. The journal entries from 2 years earlier described following women and taking photographs, but the more recent pages revealed plans for kidnapping and murder. Jessica had been his first victim, but she would not have been his last. Brian Mitchell was arrested at his workplace on Friday morning. Security guard Daniel Brooks later told police that Mitchell had been acting strangely all week, calling in sick twice and appearing distracted when he did show up for work. Brooks had noticed Mitchell washing his truck obsessively in the employee parking lot, scrubbing every surface multiple times. During the initial interrogation, Mitchell denied any involvement in Jessica's disappearance. He claimed someone else had stolen his identity and created the David Thompson profile to frame him for the crime. His story fell apart quickly when Detective Hayes presented the physical evidence found in his house and the digital trail connecting him to Jessica's phone. Prosecutor Catherine Williams reviewed all the evidence and concluded they had enough material to charge Mitchell with kidnapping and murder. The DNA samples collected from Jessica's belongings matched Mitchell's genetic profile perfectly, providing scientific proof of his guilt that would be impossible to dispute in court. Dr. Richard Thompson from the State Forensics Laboratory confirmed that Mitchell's DNA was present on multiple items found at the crime scene. The evidence included skin cells under Jessica's fingernails, proving she had fought desperately against her attacker before being overpowered. The investigation team also discovered that Mitchell had been researching methods for disposing of human remains. His computer search history included queries about remote locations, chemical decomposition, and ways to avoid detection by police dogs. This evidence suggested Jessica's body might never be recovered. Local news media began reporting on Mitchell's arrest, and other potential victims started coming forward with information. 3 women contacted police to report that they had been approached by someone matching Mitchell's description in the months before Jessica's disappearance. Each woman had felt uncomfortable during their brief encounters and had avoided further contact. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit studied Mitchell's journal entries and concluded that he fit the profile of an organized serial killer who had been carefully planning his crimes. Agent Jennifer Parker warned that Mitchell would likely have continued killing if he had not been caught, with his attacks becoming more frequent and violent over time. As Part 3 concluded, the investigation team felt confident they had identified Jessica Warren's killer and gathered enough evidence to ensure his conviction. However, the most important question remained unanswered. Where was Jessica's body, and would her family ever have the closure of laying her to rest in peace? The digital trail had led them to Brian Mitchell, but the physical trail to Jessica's final resting place remained hidden somewhere in the dark corners of his twisted mind. Brian Mitchell sat in the Stark interview room at Millbrook Police Station, his hands cuffed to the metal table that separated him from Detective Robert Hayes. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face, revealing the exhaustion and fear that he had been hiding behind a mask of normalcy for days. Detective Hayes had conducted hundreds of interrogations during his career, but few suspects had unnerved him as much as Mitchell did. The man appeared ordinary in every way, the kind of person you would pass on the street without a second glance. Yet the evidence proved he was capable of unspeakable evil. "We know you killed Jessica Warren," Detective Hayes said calmly, placing a folder full of evidence photographs on the table between them. "Your DNA was found on her belongings. Your phone records show you were communicating with her on the night she disappeared. We found maps and plans in your house." Mitchell stared at the table without speaking for several minutes. His lawyer, public defender Mark Johnson, had advised him to remain silent until they could review all the evidence. But the weight of proof against his client was overwhelming, and Johnson knew that cooperation might be Mitchell's only hope of avoiding the death penalty. The interrogation continued for 6 hours with breaks every 90 minutes as required by law. Detective Hayes was joined by FBI agent Jennifer Parker, whose experience with serial killers helped her recognize the psychological tactics needed to break through Mitchell's defenses. "Tell us what happened to Jessica," Agent Parker said during the afternoon session. "Her family deserves to know where she is so they can give her a proper burial. You can do one decent thing in this whole mess by helping them find peace." Mitchell's composure finally cracked when they showed him photographs of Jessica's family at a press conference, pleading for information about their daughter's whereabouts. Tears began streaming down his face as he realized the full impact of what he had done to innocent people who had never harmed him. "I never meant for it to go so far," Mitchell whispered, his voice barely audible in the quiet room. "It started as just watching and taking pictures, but the feelings kept getting stronger. I couldn't control them anymore." The confession that followed revealed details so disturbing that even experienced investigators struggled to maintain their professional composure. Mitchell described how he had been obsessed with Jessica for months before making contact through the dating app. He had learned her schedule, her habits, and her vulnerabilities through careful surveillance. Mitchell admitted to creating multiple fake dating profiles over the years, using them to manipulate young women into meeting him in isolated locations. Jessica had been the first one he had actually killed, but he confessed to assaulting 2 other women in neighboring towns who had managed to escape before he could complete his attacks. "I told Jessica I was having car trouble near the park," Mitchell continued, his voice growing steadier as he unburdened himself of the terrible secret. "She was so trusting and kind. She actually offered to help me call for a tow truck. That's when I grabbed her." Detective Hayes fought to control his anger as Mitchell described the violence that followed. Jessica had fought bravely against her attacker, scratching and kicking until Mitchell overpowered her with brute force. The struggle had lasted several minutes before Jessica finally succumbed to her injuries. Mitchell led investigators to a remote wooded area 15 miles outside Millbrook, where he had buried Jessica's body in a shallow grave. The location was so isolated that it might never have been discovered without his confession. Search teams worked for hours before finding the remains of the young woman whose disappearance had haunted the community for weeks. Dr. Patricia Mills supervised the recovery of Jessica's body, ensuring that every piece of evidence was properly documented and preserved for the upcoming trial. The forensic examination confirmed that Jessica had died from blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with Mitchell's confession about using a metal pipe as a weapon. The news of Jessica's body being found brought both relief and renewed grief to her family. Tom Warren collapsed when Detective Hayes called to inform him that his sister had been located. The confirmation that Jessica was dead ended any remaining hope that she might still be alive somewhere. William and Dorothy Warren, Jessica's parents, held each other as they wept in their living room surrounded by family photographs that now served as painful reminders of their loss. The elderly couple had aged years during the weeks of uncertainty, and the final confirmation of their daughter's fate left them emotionally devastated. Mitchell's confession also revealed his plans to kill other women in Millbrook. He had compiled detailed files on 12 potential victims, including their work schedules, home addresses, and personal routines. Police immediately contacted each woman to warn them about the danger they had unknowingly faced. The investigation team discovered that Mitchell had been escalating his criminal behavior for over 3 years. What started as voyeurism and stalking had gradually evolved into more serious crimes, including breaking into women's homes and stealing personal items. The assault cases in neighboring towns had been practice runs for the murder he eventually committed. Prosecutor Catherine Williams met with the Warren family to discuss the charges that would be filed against Mitchell. The evidence supported charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and multiple counts of stalking and harassment. Williams believed they had a strong case that would result in a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The confession process took 3 days to complete, as Mitchell provided details about all his criminal activities. Police departments in 4 counties coordinated their investigations to ensure that all of Mitchell's victims received justice. Several cold cases were finally solved based on information he provided. As Part 4 concluded, Brian Mitchell sat in his jail cell awaiting trial for the murder of Jessica Warren. His confession had provided answers to many questions, but it could never undo the terrible crime that had destroyed so many lives. The legal process was just beginning, and the community of Millbrook would have to find a way to heal from the trauma of learning that a monster had been living among them. The courthouse in downtown Millbrook had never seen anything like the media attention that surrounded the trial of Brian Mitchell. News vans lined the streets as reporters from across the country gathered to cover the case that had shocked the quiet English town. Security guards checked everyone entering the building as crowds of curious onlookers hoped to get a glimpse of the proceedings. Judge Harold Stevens had presided over serious criminal cases for 25 years, but the Mitchell trial would be one of the most challenging of his career. The evidence was overwhelming, but the emotional impact on the community meant that finding impartial jurors had been extremely difficult. It took 3 weeks of questioning before 12 citizens were selected to decide Mitchell's fate. Prosecutor Catherine Williams opened the trial with a detailed presentation of the evidence against Mitchell. She showed the jury photographs of the crime scene, DNA test results, and excerpts from Mitchell's disturbing journal. Her opening statement painted a picture of a calculating predator who had terrorized innocent women while hiding behind a facade of normalcy. Brian Mitchell is not the victim here, Williams told the jury. He is a cold-blooded killer who stalked Jessica Warren for months before luring her to her death. The evidence will show that he planned every detail of this crime and would have continued killing if he had not been caught. Defense attorney Mark Johnson faced an impossible task in trying to defend his client. The physical evidence was overwhelming, and Mitchell's own confession had provided investigators with details that only the killer could have known. Johnson's only strategy was to argue for reduced charges based on Mitchell's mental health history and claim that the murder had not been premeditated. "My client is a deeply troubled man who needs treatment, not execution," Johnson argued in his opening statement. While his actions were inexcusable, the evidence will show that Brian Mitchell was suffering from severe mental illness that impaired his judgment and ability to control his behavior. The first week of testimony focused on the investigation and evidence collection. Detective Robert Hayes spent 2 days on the witness stand describing how the case had unfolded from the discovery of Jessica's belongings to Mitchell's eventual arrest and confession. His testimony was precise and professional, but the emotional toll of the case was evident in his voice. Dr. Patricia Mills testified about the forensic evidence that linked Mitchell to the crime scene. She explained how DNA testing had conclusively proven that Mitchell had been present when Jessica was killed. The scientific evidence left no doubt about his guilt, despite the defense attorney's attempts to question the reliability of the testing procedures. Jessica's family attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row where Mitchell would have to see their faces throughout the proceedings. Tom Warren wore a photograph of his sister pinned to his jacket, a constant reminder of the life that had been stolen. William and Dorothy Warren held hands as they listened to the painful details of their daughter's final moments. The most difficult testimony came from Mitchell himself when he took the witness stand in his own defense. His lawyer had advised against it, but Mitchell insisted on telling his version of events. His testimony was rambling and often contradictory, revealing a man who seemed unable to accept responsibility for his actions. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," Mitchell said through tears. "The thoughts in my head got stronger and stronger until I couldn't fight them anymore. I know what I did was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. I need help, not punishment." Expert witness Dr. Emily Davis, a forensic psychologist, testified about Mitchell's mental state during the time leading up to Jessica's murder. She had interviewed Mitchell extensively and reviewed his medical records, but concluded that he had been legally sane when he committed the crime. Mr. Mitchell clearly understood the difference between right and wrong, Dr. Davis explained to the jury. His elaborate planning and attempts to cover up the crime demonstrate that he was fully aware of the consequences of his actions. Mental illness may have influenced his behavior, but it does not excuse his choices. The prosecution presented evidence showing that Mitchell had researched similar crimes online and had studied techniques used by other serial killers. His computer search history revealed months of planning that contradicted any claim that Jessica's murder had been a spontaneous act of violence. Victim impact statements from Jessica's family and friends filled the courtroom with emotion during the final week of the trial. Kelly Martinez, Jessica's roommate, described the vibrant young woman who had been looking forward to building a future with someone she thought she could trust. "Jessica was the kindest person I ever knew," Kelly said through tears. "She always saw the best in people, which is why she trusted the monster who killed her. Her death has left a hole in all our hearts that will never heal." The community of Millbrook rallied around the Warren family throughout the trial. Victim advocate Sandra Lee organized support groups and fundraising efforts to help with legal expenses and memorial costs. Local businesses donated money and services, showing the solidarity that had emerged from the tragedy. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning with a unanimous verdict of guilty on all charges. Judge Stevens scheduled the sentencing hearing for the following week, giving Mitchell's family time to make final pleas for mercy. The defense team planned to call character witnesses who would testify about Mitchell's troubled childhood and history of mental health problems. As Part 5 concluded, the community of Millbrook began to grapple with the long-term impact of the crime that had shattered their sense of security. The trial had provided some measure of justice, but the healing process would take much longer. Many residents wondered how they had failed to recognize the danger that had been living among them for years. Local churches organized counseling services for people struggling with anxiety and fear in the wake of the trial. Women's safety groups formed to provide education about protecting themselves from online predators and recognizing warning signs of dangerous behavior. The case had forever changed the quiet town where everyone thought they knew their neighbors. The upcoming sentencing would close one chapter of the story, but the community would be living with the consequences of Brian Mitchell's crimes for years to come. The sentencing hearing for Brian Mitchell took place on a gray morning in late March, exactly 6 months after Jessica Warren's disappearance had first made headlines. Judge Harold Stevens entered the packed courtroom with the weight of an entire community's expectations resting on his shoulders. The decision he was about to make would determine whether Mitchell would ever have the possibility of freedom again. Before announcing the sentence, Judge Stevens allowed Jessica's family to make final victim impact statements. William Warren, Jessica's father, walked slowly to the podium with a prepared speech that he had rewritten dozens of times. His voice trembled as he spoke about the daughter who would never have the chance to get married or have children of her own. Jessica was 24 years old with her entire life ahead of her, William said, looking directly at Mitchell. She was planning to go back to school to become a teacher like her mother. She wanted to help children learn to love reading the way she did. You took all of that away from her and from us. Dorothy Warren, Jessica's mother, chose not to speak at the hearing. The months of grief and stress had taken a severe toll on her health, and she sat quietly beside her husband with tears streaming down her face. Tom Warren delivered the most emotional statement, describing how his sister's murder had destroyed his faith in human goodness. "I used to believe that most people were basically decent," Tom said. "Jessica believed that too, which is why she trusted you enough to meet you alone. Your evil has poisoned our family and our community. I hope you spend every day of the rest of your life thinking about what you took from us." Mitchell's defense attorney, Mark Johnson, made a final plea for mercy, arguing that his client deserved a chance at rehabilitation rather than permanent imprisonment. Johnson called character witnesses who testified about Mitchell's difficult childhood and history of mental illness, hoping to convince the judge that treatment might be more appropriate than punishment. "Brian Mitchell is clearly a damaged person who needs help," Johnson argued. "While his crimes were terrible, sentencing him to die in prison serves no purpose other than revenge. Society would be better served by studying his case to understand how we can prevent similar tragedies in the future." Prosecutor Catherine Williams countered with a detailed summary of Mitchell's crimes and the danger he would always pose to society. She reminded the judge that Mitchell had planned Jessica's murder carefully and had been preparing to kill other women when he was arrested. "This was not a crime of passion or temporary insanity," Williams stated firmly. "Brian Mitchell is a predator who spent months stalking innocent women and planning their deaths. The only way to ensure he never hurts anyone else is to keep him locked away forever." Judge Stevens took 30 minutes to review his notes before announcing the sentence that would determine Mitchell's fate. The courtroom fell silent as he began to speak, his words measured and deliberate as he explained the reasoning behind his decision. "Mr. Mitchell, you have been found guilty of the most serious crimes our legal system recognizes," Judge Stevens said. "The evidence shows that you planned and carried out the murder of Jessica Warren with calculated cruelty. You have shown no genuine remorse for your actions, only self-pity about the consequences you now face." The judge sentenced Mitchell to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole, plus additional consecutive sentences for kidnapping, stalking, and other related charges. The total sentence ensured that Mitchell would never be eligible for release under any circumstances, even if laws changed in the future. Mitchell showed no emotion as the sentence was announced, staring at the table in front of him while court officers prepared to escort him back to his cell. His family members, who had attended the trial hoping for a more lenient sentence, left the courthouse without speaking to reporters. Detective Robert Hayes felt a sense of relief as he watched Mitchell being led away in handcuffs. The investigation had consumed 6 months of his life and had given him nightmares about the violence that humans were capable of inflicting on each other. Justice had been served, but the scars left by the case would never fully heal. The Warren family held a press conference outside the courthouse to thank the community for their support during the darkest period of their lives. They announced the establishment of the Jessica Warren Memorial Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of violent crime and promoting safety education for young women. "Jessica would want her death to mean something," Dorothy Warren said, speaking publicly for the first time since the trial began. "If this foundation can save even one life by teaching women to recognize dangerous situations, then maybe some good can come from this terrible tragedy." The foundation's first initiative was to work with dating app companies to implement better safety features and verification procedures. Tom Warren became a full-time advocate for victims' rights, traveling to other communities to share Jessica's story and promote awareness about online predators. Local law enforcement agencies used the Mitchell case to develop new training programs for investigating digital crimes and serial predators. Detective Hayes worked with the FBI to create educational materials that could help other police departments recognize similar patterns of criminal behavior. The community of Millbrook slowly began to heal from the trauma of learning that a killer had been living among them for years. New security measures were implemented at public locations, and neighborhood watch groups formed to help residents feel safer in their own homes. Dr. Patricia Mills published a research paper about the forensic evidence in the Mitchell case, contributing to the scientific knowledge that could help solve future crimes. Her work demonstrated the importance of preserving DNA evidence and using advanced testing techniques to identify suspects. Library director George Patterson worked with city officials to install better lighting and security cameras around Riverside Park, where Jessica's belongings had been discovered. A memorial bench was placed near the old oak tree with a plaque, honoring Jessica's memory and reminding visitors to stay alert for their own safety. 5 years after the trial ended, Brian Mitchell remains in maximum security prison where he spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. He has never expressed genuine remorse for his crimes and continues to blame his actions on mental illness and childhood trauma. The case of Brian Mitchell serves as a stark reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary appearances, and that vigilance remains the best protection against those who would harm innocent people. Detective Hayes continues to work in Millbrook, carrying with him the lessons learned from this case and the commitment to protecting his community from predators. Jessica Warren's legacy lives on through the foundation that bears her name and the countless lives that have been saved by the safety education programs it supports. While her death was a senseless tragedy, her memory continues to inspire efforts to create a safer world for future generations.